The day I found out, I was standing in the middle of a Kroger parking lot with a bag of groceries in each hand and my phone buzzing in my coat pocket. I almost didn't answer. I was tired. It had been a 12-hour shift at the clinic, and my feet were doing that thing where they stop hurting and just go numb, which I've learned is actually worse. But something made me set the bags down on the trunk of my car and pick up. It was my aunt, my dad's sister, the one who sends Christmas cards with the wrong names on them and calls me sweetie in a way that has never once felt sweet. "I just thought you should know," she said, "before you show up and it's awkward." That's how she told me. Before it's awkward. As if what was about to happen to me was a scheduling inconvenience. My brother had moved his girlfriend into my room. Not the guest room, not the basement. My room, the one I had been paying $800 a month to sleep in for the past 3 years. Every first of the month, Venmo, never late. The room with the window that stuck in humidity and the closet door that swung open on its own at 2 in the morning, if you didn't wedge a shoe against it. My room. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after I hung up. A cart rolled past me. A woman with a toddler on her hip gave me a look. I didn't move. I was doing the math. 3 years, 36 months, $800. $28,800. Paid to my own parents in their own house for a room I apparently no longer had access to. I need to back up. When I moved back home at 27, it felt like the only reasonable thing to do. I'd finished my nursing degree, taken a job at an urgent care 20 minutes from my parents' house, and my rent in the city had just gone up for the 3rd time in 2 years. My dad was the one who suggested it. He sat me down at the kitchen table on a Sunday, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd had birthday dinners, where everything that mattered in our family had been decided. And he said, "Why throw money at a landlord when you can save and help us out at the same time?" It sounded reasonable. It sounded like logic. It sounded like family. My mom made it clear she wasn't exactly thrilled, but she didn't say no. My brother, he's 4 years younger than me, still living at home, still between things the way he'd been between things since he graduated. He thought it was fine. He had the bigger room anyway. He always had. The $800 a month was my dad's idea too. He framed it as contributing to the household. Not rent. Contribution. Like I was a sponsor of some kind. I didn't argue. I was grateful to have a place. Grateful not to be splitting a 3-bedroom with 4 other people anymore. Grateful to sleep somewhere quiet, where I didn't have to label my leftovers. I should have gotten it in writing. I know that now. I knew it then too, somewhere in the back of my head where I kept all the things I didn't want to think about. But you don't ask your parents for a lease agreement. You just don't. Because it feels like you're saying you don't trust them. And at the time, I still did. I paid on time every month. I bought my own groceries. I kept my space clean. I picked up extra shifts on holidays so I wouldn't be underfoot. I took my car in for my brother's oil change once because he asked nicely, and I had the afternoon off. I made cucumber sandwiches for my mother's book club because she texted me from the grocery store. "Can you do those little ones you made last time?" Not a question exactly. More of an instruction. I did it. I always did it. Meanwhile, my brother's girlfriend, I'll call her what my dad called her, his partner, like they were in a law firm, started appearing more and more. Dinner twice a week, then 3 times. Then she had a drawer in his bathroom. Then she had a drawer in his bathroom. Then she had opinions about where we kept the dog's food. I didn't say anything. It was at my house, not technically, not legally. I was a contributing tenant in my childhood bedroom, apparently, and I had exactly as much say as that implies. What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that at some point over the past 8 months, the plan had changed. My brother needed more space. That was the phrase they kept using later. He needed more space. He and his girlfriend, they needed room to grow, room to breathe, room to figure out the next chapter of their life together. My dad had apparently agreed. My mom had apparently agreed. My mom had apparently agreed. Nobody had agreed to tell me. I was working a closing shift the day they did it. 12 hours on my feet. 2 flu cases, 1 kid who needed stitches and screamed the whole time. A coworker who called in sick, so I covered her afternoon. I got home at 9:45. The porch light was off. My boxes were in the garage. Not all of them. Just the ones they'd already gone through. Clothes in garbage bags, my books stacked on the concrete floor next to my father's toolbox, my toiletries in a plastic bin that still had a Trader Joe's sticker on the side, from when I'd used it for moving. The rest of my stuff, my good lamp, my record player, the quilts my grandmother made me, was presumably still in my room, which was now his room, which had a new lock on the door I couldn't open. There was a text from my dad on my phone. I'd missed it at 7:30. "We thought it would be easier this way. You're practical. You'll figure it out. We can talk when things settle down." I read it 3 times. "You're practical. You'll figure it out." I sat down on the porch steps. I still had my work badge clipped to my scrubs. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't know what I would say. I thought about knocking, but I didn't know what I would do if they answered. I thought about crying, but I was too tired and too confused. And there was a small, cold part of me that had clicked into a different gear. I wasn't going to beg. I knew that much. I'd watched enough people in that urgent care come in with things that could have been prevented, problems that had been ignored until they couldn't be ignored anymore. And I'd learned that the worst thing you can do is wait for someone to treat you the way you deserve. You stop waiting. You act. I got back in my car. I drove to my coworker Petra's apartment. She had a pull-out couch and I'd covered her shift 3 weeks prior and she didn't ask questions. I slept for 6 hours and when I woke up, I made a list. My coworker's husband had a friend, this was the thread I pulled, who worked in property management and had been through a landlord-tenant dispute 2 years back. He gave me a name. A real estate attorney named Whitfield, not a family friend, not someone my parents knew, not anyone who would feel the need to smooth things over or suggest I consider their perspective. Just a professional who answered the phone. I told him the situation. He asked how long I'd been paying. He asked if I had any documentation, Venmo records, texts about the arrangement, anything in writing. I had 36 months of Venmo transactions, every one of them labeled rent, because my dad had specifically asked me to write that so he could track them. He'd asked me to write rent. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," Whitfield said. "Here's what you need to understand. When money is exchanged consistently, labeled as rent, over an extended period, what you have is a tenancy. It doesn't matter that it's your childhood home. It doesn't matter that the landlord is your father. You were a tenant. And you cannot be removed from a tenancy without proper notice." Proper notice. In my state that means 30 days minimum, delivered in writing. I had received a text at 7:30 on a Tuesday that said, "You're practical, you'll figure it out." That was not proper notice. Whitfield told me I had options. I could pursue a wrongful eviction claim. I could seek return of my deposit, which I had never been given because my dad said family doesn't need deposits, which turned out to be the most expensive thing he ever said to me. I could also, depending on how things played out, seek damages for the cost of emergency housing and personal property. "Do you want to do this?" he asked, not pushing, just asking. I thought about the garage, my grandmother's quilts on the concrete floor, the garbage bags. "Yes," I said. "I want to be honest about the part that comes next because I think people assume it felt good, like justice arriving on a white horse, like a movie. It didn't feel like that." My dad called me 4 days later. He'd been served notice of a legal claim. He called from the house phone, which he never uses, which means he was shaken enough to forget he had a cell phone. "I don't understand why you're doing this to our family," he said. I had prepared for this. Not rehearsed exactly, but I'd lived in my own head with it long enough to know what I wanted to say. "You changed the locks while I was at work," I said. "You put my things in garbage bags on the garage floor. You didn't call me. You didn't give me notice. You treated me like a stranger who'd overstayed a welcome, and I was paying you $800 a month. That was different, he said. That was family. Right, I said. I know. I hung up. My mother called an hour later. She cried. She said she'd had nothing to do with the decision, which I believed only partially. She said my brother was going through a hard time, which I also believed partially. She said I was making things impossible, and that one I just let sit there. My aunt called the following morning and said, in the same voice she'd used to tell me about the parking lot, "Well, honey, at least you'll have something to look back on and learn from." I blocked her number. The legal process took 3 months. It was not glamorous. It was paperwork and waiting, and a $60 parking fee at the courthouse that I had to pay twice because I went to the wrong building the first time. Whitfield was efficient and clear and didn't pad his hours, which I respected. My dad got a different attorney, someone who clearly told him the Venmo records were not going to help his case, because at about the 6-week mark, he stopped fighting the return of funds and started negotiating the amount. They wanted to settle. Of course they wanted to settle. We settled. I'm not going to say the exact number because there are things that are mine to keep, but it covered the wrongful eviction, the emergency housing costs I'd documented carefully, and a portion of the months I'd paid without a proper rental agreement in place. It did not cover everything. It never does. What I got back was not $28,800, not even close. That part still sits with me. I'd like to tell you it doesn't. I live in a one-bedroom apartment now. It's on the 3rd floor of a building with thin walls and a radiator that makes sounds in the night like something settling, and the management company is impersonal in a way that I find genuinely comforting. There is a lease. There is a security deposit, properly documented. There is a 30-day notice clause for both parties. I read the whole thing before I signed, every page. My brother and his girlfriend are still in my old room, as far as I know. My dad hasn't called since the settlement was finalized. My mom texted me once on my birthday, just the cake emoji, nothing else. And I sent back the same, because I'm not ready to close that door completely, and I'm not ready to open it either. I've thought a lot about why I didn't see it coming. I was paying rent for 3 years to people who still thought of me as their daughter first, and a tenant never. They saw a contribution to the household. I saw a transaction with terms. The problem is we were both right, and nobody ever said so out loud. My dad told me once that the point to family is that you don't need contracts, you don't need lawyers, you don't need paperwork, because trust is supposed to handle all of that. I used to believe him. What I know now is that trust doesn't hold up in a courtroom. Trust doesn't stop someone from putting your grandmother's quilts on a concrete floor. Trust is beautiful when it's earned and honored, but it's not a legal instrument, and it will not protect you when the people you trusted decide that their convenience is more important than your security. The quilts are in my apartment now. I asked for them specifically as part of the settlement. That was the one thing I wouldn't move on. They're folded on the shelf above my bed, and some mornings I look at them, and I feel the grief of everything that had to happen to get them back to me. Other mornings I just make coffee and go to work, and come home to a door with a lock that only I have the key to. That part I don't take for granted anymore. I still think about the quilts sometimes. Not in a dramatic way, just the way you think about something when you're folding laundry or standing at the window with your coffee. They're on the shelf above my bed now, and some mornings they look like evidence, proof that I was there, that it happened, that I got something back even when I couldn't get it all back. What I lost, the money, the years, the version of my family I thought I had. I'm not going to pretend that's resolved. It isn't. $28,000 doesn't come back because a settlement says so, and the relationship with my father isn't something a legal document can address either way. But I've been thinking about what actually made the difference. Not the attorney, not the Venmo records, not even the 30-day notice clause. Those were just tools. What made the difference was that I didn't wait for someone to treat me fairly. I acted on what I knew to be true, even when acting felt like a betrayal of something I'd believed in my whole life. That's harder than it sounds. There's a version of me that sits on those porch steps for weeks, That sends the apologetic text. That asks if maybe there's been a misunderstanding, if maybe there's a way to work this out, if maybe I'm being too sensitive. I know that version well. I'd been her for 3 years, every first of the month, never late. What changed wasn't anger. Anger comes and goes, and it makes you say things you have to walk back later. What changed was something quieter, a recognition that what was happening to me was wrong in a way that had a name, a legal framework, a remedy, and that knowing the right thing to do is only useful if you're willing to actually do it. My father thought family meant contracts didn't apply. He wasn't entirely wrong about the sentiment. There's something sad about needing paperwork to trust the people who raised you. But sentiment doesn't protect you. Understanding how the world actually works does, and acting on that understanding, even when it costs you something, even when it reshapes every relationship in your family, that's what gets you from the garage floor to a door with a lock only you can open. I'm not glad it happened. I want to be clear about that. I would have preferred the version of my family where none of this was necessary. But I don't regret what I did once it did happen. I made phone calls when I wanted to fall apart. I gathered documentation when I wanted to grieve. I sat across from an attorney and answered questions clearly when every part of me wanted to be back at that kitchen table eating Sunday dinner like nothing had changed. That's not toughness in any dramatic sense. It's just the decision, made quietly and repeatedly, to not abandon yourself, because abandoning yourself feels easier in the moment. The quilts are folded on the shelf. The lease is in a folder in my desk drawer. The radiator makes sounds at night and I've stopped noticing them. I think that's what getting through something actually looks like. Not triumph. Just mourning. Just coffee. Just a door that's yours.